Hello and welcome to the Cavoodle Coach podcast. My name is Tiana Karamayas and I'm your host. Now, if this is the first time you're coming across this podcast, thank you. I hope you enjoy it. Again, it's all about cavoodles, so if you have a cavoodle, this is the right place for you. If you are coming back though and you used to watch this podcast back a year ago when I originally started it, thanks for coming back. Now, for the first episode of this Cavoodle Coach podcast reboot, what I wanted to do was to answer all of your questions. I wanted to say thank you so much to all of my supporters over the years for supporting me, following along with me, working with me, and I wanted to do a podcast episode that was more interview style. So today I am joined by my partner Xander, and he's going to ask me the questions that you asked me. So we're going to get started. Xander's going to ask me the questions. I've only very briefly looked at them, so I'm pretty much going to be answering them off the top of my head. But let's get started and see how we go. Xander, do you want to introduce yourself?
Kick things off. I'm Xander. Hello, everybody. So I've got a few questions to get through here. So we'll start off, Tiana. One of the first questions that came in was, how can you say you have so many years of experience when you yourself are so young?
So the reason why I have so many years of experience, I almost have a decade of experience working in the small animal industry. I've also been raising cavoodles for 16 years in a week's time when my oldest cavoodle turned 16. But I started working in the small animal industry when I was 15 years old. I went to my local vet clinic, got a job there, and ended up working there for over 4 years. So that was really the start of my experience in the small animal industry. I then have worked in a grooming salon. It was a boutique grooming salon, learned a lot about coat maintenance, obviously how to groom cavoodles and other small dogs. And I also worked as a puppy school trainer, which again was very, very amazing experience. I learned so much about the behavior of young puppies. And then I actually started my very own Cavoodle breeding business. And when I started my Cavoodle breeding business, I did a lot of study. So I did different certificates, learning about breeding, about the development of puppies, the development of their brain, how they learn best. And throughout this time, I also went out and I did study a year of a Bachelor of Veterinary Technology. I completed a Certificate 2 in Animal Studies, and then I also did a few breeding certificates on the side as well. So that's how I have so much experience at such a young age. I started when I was 15. I am now 24, so it's almost been a decade, and I love every single moment of it.
Cool. That probably leads us into the next question. Tell us about the most rewarding aspects of your breeding for you as an individual, and how has your work shaped you as a person?
The most rewarding experience. So for breeding, there's two parts. So my favorite part of breeding is the birth. I love the experience of bringing new life into the world. You know, I know some people might find it a bit gross, but I just think the whole act of bringing that life into the world, there's nothing like it. The excitement of not knowing, you know, how many boys are there going to be, how many girls are there going to be, and then being able to reach out to my litter families and announce the birth and the safe delivery of the puppies. That's my favorite part. But equally, something that is also very, very rewarding is when, you know, the families get to meet their puppy for the first time and take their puppy home, and to see like the joy on their faces, to see how happy the puppy is because it finally, you know, is going to its forever home. That is so rewarding. And then when I hear from the families over the following weeks and months about how much, you know, they love their puppy, how well it's fit into their family, and how thankful they are to have the puppy, that honestly, nothing beats that feeling, to knowing you've changed a family's life for the next hopefully 15 years.
Okay, so lots of rewarding aspects of the job. Another question was, what is the single most difficult element of breeding such high value puppies?
I think the most difficult part of breeding is not so much the actual breeding and the raising of the puppies. That's something I'm very confident in doing. I've got my curriculum there. I've done it so many times now. I'm very confident in it. The part that I would say I struggle the most with is something that you might have heard of. It's called imposter syndrome, which is where you start to doubt whether you're good enough. And that happens when you see, you go onto social media and you can see all these other people. You can get negative comments from people who are following you about how you're doing the wrong thing or you shouldn't breed crossbreeds. You see what other breeders are doing, and that imposter syndrome, it can be quite powerful in not a good way. So that most difficult part about breeding is just backing myself and remembering, what I do with my puppies, the results I get, and why my program works. And the best way I do that is honestly by staying offline as much as I can and not looking at what other people are doing and not reading the negative comments that you inevitably get when you breed a crossbreed breed.
Okay. Do you find, this relates to another question then, do you find other breeders of individuals in your industry are supporting each other to do well? Is it a matter of where everyone is only interested in themselves and this person's asked, how can we encourage more dialogue within the industry?
I think, and this is everyone's experience might be different, but from my experience, when I used to I had a mentor, and he didn't breed Cavoodles at first, he bred other breeds. That was the best advice and help that I got. That was very, very supportive, and he was always very supportive, but he wasn't on social media the way that I was, so we were never really, I guess, competitors. But in the breeding industry, there can be a lot of negativity, a lot of hate going around for other breeders. And to be honest, I'm not a part of it. For my own Instagram and everything, I don't follow other breeders, not because I don't support them, but because I like to just focus on what I'm doing, focus on my own puppies without that whole imposter syndrome coming on. So if you're a breeder and you're, getting into breeding for the first time, my biggest tip would be to find one breeder that you really look up to and you really respect, get your advice and your help from them, and then just seclude yourself a bit from the rest of the breeders out there, because breeders who are struggling to find homes for their puppies can be very negative towards other breeders who are doing well, and it can really affect your mental health. So pick one breeder that you like, one breeder that respects you equally, and then cut out all the noise for everyone else. That's how I think it can be. That's how I've navigated it, especially because we also have, if you're looking at breeding Cavoodles, we now have something called the Theodore, which is, a possibility of the Cavoodle being turned into a purebred dog if enough breeders join into it and all of that. So now we have Theodore breeders and we have Cavoodle breeders, and people who are Theodore breeders can be quite negative towards just Cavoodle breeders, even though the breed is the exact same, by the way, same dog. So I think really, just stick with one breeder and then, cut out the noise for everyone else. And hopefully in time, what I think will happen is, obviously with COVID, there was a massive influx of breeders. Once, the years go on and the people who were breeding just for some quick money because the prices of puppies were so expensive back then, once they stopped breeding because they realized that it's actually a very hard and demanding job that needs 24/7 time, and they stopped getting that ridiculous money for not even doing anything with their puppies. Once those breeders, and I use what do you call these? Okay, so backyard breeders. Once the backyard breeders stop, and once the number of Cavoodle breeders in Australia do start to, I guess, get a little bit smaller, and it's more people who do it as a full-time job, I think the industry will get a lot better. Right now, it's just very much full of people who are looking for a quick dollar. That was a very long answer to a question.
That's all right. It was a full answer there. It sort of ties into the next question, and you have slightly touched on it, but this person wants to know, would you be open to being a mentor for a new breeder, or doing future podcast episodes about breeding specifically? Everyone has to start somewhere, and unfortunately most of the forum's newbies get so much negativity from other experienced breeders out there.
They do. I've seen it. I've read it, and it's horrible. For me, mentoring, I would love to do it. I wouldn't say I'd have the time right now to do it properly. When I had my mentor as a breeder, he was available 24/7, and he had so much time for me, and that was just the most incredible, experience, because when you're breeding for the first time, your dog's going through pregnancy and birth for the first time, it's a scary experience. So having someone there was really helpful. But right now, because I've got the breeding business, I've also got my online courses that I'm trying to develop, and I wouldn't have the time right now, but in the future, I think I would really love it, because I do think, it's a bit of a full circle moment, because I found it so helpful to have a mentor, and I would love to provide that with someone else. But what I would say is, if you are, again, looking for a mentor as a breeder, it's not a bad idea to go get a mentor who isn't breeding the same breed as you. Firstly, that will eliminate any sort of jealousy or them not giving you the help you need because they're worried you're going to take their business. So yeah, I would probably look for a breeder who isn't breeding your breed, and someone who's going to be following a similar approach to breeding as you are. So you might have come across something called Puppy Culture or the Badass Breeder programs. If you're wanting to do those and you find a breeder who also does that, that's going to be really helpful for you. Those would be my tips. And then in the future, if I ever do, believe I have the time for mentoring, I will, announce it, and then you can come to me and we can work together.
Good to know. There is a date ahead. Okay, cool. Let's move over to some of those grooming related questions that we have here. So maybe, I guess, a basic one for you, Tiana, or maybe not so basic. The first person's asked here, how do you keep your Cavoodle's eyes clean?
So with the eyes, my best tip is you have to keep the hair short around their eyes. So you yourself need to have a pair of scissors. And I would say at least once a week I am trimming the hair between the eyes on my dogs, and that's the best way to keep it clean, because you're making sure that when they do have any discharge from the eye, whether they're sleeping and they've got sleep or they have a bit of irritation, it's not going to then sit on the hair, stain the hair, and become very clumpy. And also, if it's already stained, the best way to get rid of it is to cut it. So I would always have a pair of scissors, and cutting the hair and trimming it between the eyes is the best way to prevent it. Second thing to take note of, if you have a lighter colored Cavoodle, so maybe a Cavoodle who has a lot of white on the face, it's inevitable your dog is going to have a lot more tear stains around the eye because they have that lighter color fur. And it's not something really you can change because there is a chemical in the tears, and that's what stains the hair. Now, if you're asking about how to just keep them clean in general and just like the actual eye, I'm a very strong believer with not getting involved unless you need to. If you do too much, you can irritate the eye further. So if anything, the only thing I would do to clean the eye is I would just get a very soft paper towel, put some warm water on it, and just wipe over the eyes very gently. I wouldn't go messing around with something so sensitive so much, because I think that can lead to more problems. If you are getting a lot of bad discharge though, it might be green, it might be very smelly, it might have, different colors about it. Obviously then you need to go to your vet. You might have an eye infection forming. So those are my tips. Trimming the hair between the eyes, don't touch the eyes unless you need to, and just know that the staining is inevitable because there's a chemical in the tears, and that's what stains the hair.
Okay, good to know. Similar question. My dog doesn't like when I groom his face. Any tips on how I can get, him or her used to, I guess that interaction with the face, commonly?
Definitely. So you want to imagine your puppy was 3 weeks old again. What I do as a breeder is I go in with a cotton tip, and I just gently rub that around the eyes and over the eyes every single day as a puppy to desensitize them to the whole grooming process. So you want to pretty much go back to that step with your own dog. Obviously, because they're older, they're probably going to try and either bite the cotton tip or they're going to be very agitated. So choose your time. You want to do it when your puppy is very sleepy. You want to do it when they're not having their zoomies, because then anything going near their face, they're going to bite. And even if you can't go with the cotton tip, practice with just your hands at first. When they're lying on your lap at night, you're watching TV, just practice rubbing your hands over their eyes. You can praise them with, reinforcement. You can tell them yes if you use a marker signal. You can then give them, little treats. and then slowly work your way up to the cotton tip. And then after the cotton tip, you can go with a bigger object. You can go into scissors and just rub the scissors over the eyes. You pretty much want to make sure that from now going forward, every single interaction you have with your puppy is very, very positive. We don't want them to have any sort of negative experience with it. So start really slow, and any sort of counter conditioning training. So when they already have a preconceived idea about something, if you want to change that, that's going to take time. So you have to be patient, start small, and don't jump ahead too quickly, because then you'll be back to square one.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. More of a behavioural question next. So we have two people asking a very similar. My 15-week-old Cavoodle and my 10-month-old Cavoodle. One's turning into a bit of a barker. One barks at everything. Is the way that we change this the same for both? How do I go about changing their behaviour?
So barking is one of those things that can come under the banner of a behavioural issue. And the reason being is, number one, it's a behaviour you don't like and it's therefore causing an issue within your household. But number two, there's no one fix for every single dog barking. And the reason is you have to look at what your dog is barking at, what is triggering them. For some dogs, it might simply be, someone walking in front of the house. For another dog, it might be any sound they hear. It could be the curtains moving in the wind. And depending on what your dog is barking at, changes how you approach the barking. Similar to this, if you have to look at your dog, are they barking because of excitement? Or are they barking because they're scared? Or are they barking because they're being protective? The reason they are barking is going to change how you approach it. So what I would be doing is I would be writing down a list of every time your dog barks, what are they barking at? What were they doing the moments before they were barking? And how would they be feeling in that moment? And then what you want to try and do is control that emotion. So if your puppy, you could notice they were acting a little bit anxious, they were licking their lips, they were shaking their coat out, they were pacing, and then suddenly they saw something outside and they start barking, well, then you know that they were feeling anxious. And then you need to go back and go, well, what caused them to feel anxious before this moment? Was it the fact that you have been getting ready to leave the house and they have separation anxiety? Was it the fact that, they tried to bite a piece of furniture and you got angry at them in the morning and it's led to them being anxious all day? Look at what the cause of that emotion is and then learn how to manage it. A puppy or a dog that is very calm and happy is a lot less likely to bark than a dog that is scared, anxious, or protective. In addition to this, when they are barking, you do need to redirect them. And you do need to make sure, and this is a really big tip, that when your dog barks, you cannot get angry at them. If you get angry at them and you yell at them and you tell them to be quiet, what happens is you're telling them that they are doing the right thing by feeling that way. Because if you yell, then they go, oh, so it was right to bark. I should be feeling this emotion because you're also feeling this emotion. Instead, you always want to combat barking by being extremely calm to reassure your dog that everything is okay. And as hard as that can be, because when your dog is barking, sometimes you just want to, get a little bit angry and get them to stop immediately. That's not going to help you in that situation. You have to let them know that barking is really not necessary because everything really is okay. And then the final tip is, if your dog is barking at things like sounds and people and dogs, you really want to work at some counter conditioning training. You want to desensitize them to it. So, if they bark at sirens, play sirens on YouTube at a low volume, give them treats, increase the sound over time, the loudness of it, increase the treats some more, and just work at desensitizing them to those sounds. And again, this is a one-on-one case. You can't just have one fix for all dogs. So if you're really having trouble, it's a good idea to work with someone who can look at your dog in particular, how they're reacting. Sometimes a behavioralist is needed, and definitely some management.
Cool. I think the only time it's acceptable is when they bark at themselves in the mirror.
Yeah, probably. That's pretty cute and funny.
Okay. Moving on to a next question, more of a behavioural question as well. How do I crate train my puppy? He cries so loud and I feel so bad. I don't know what to do.
Depends how old the puppy is. The easiest and best way to crate train your puppy is, number one, the breeder should do it. That's the easiest way. The next easiest way is the day you bring them home. So I'm not sure how old your puppy is in this situation. I'm assuming they're a little bit older because, usually if you do it from the beginning, you don't usually have quite as many issues. What you want to do with crate training, crate training, again, it can be quite dependent because your dog may already have some very negative feelings towards the crate, especially if you've been trying to crate train them and then every time they've cried, you've let them out, and now they just have a learnt behavior that if they cry, they get let out, and then that's just causing a whole other issue. But essentially with crate training, you have to make it a very positive experience for them. So having the crate there, no matter what they're doing, having it open, giving them treats inside the crate, letting them chew on a really yummy kangaroo tendon inside the crate, creating a very positive experience, then letting the flap down, and then rather than zipping it up, you leave it just open the flap so they can walk in and out still, and then eventually working at closing that crate door. Now, when it comes to crying, a puppy will always cry when they first go in the crate, unless they've been crate trained from, 3 weeks of age with the breeder, then they won't cry. But otherwise, they're going to cry when you first put them in the crate. What you have to make sure is that they're not crying because they need to go to the toilet, they're not crying because they're hungry, they're not crying because they're scared or in pain. If you can cross out all of those things, then sometimes you do just have to leave them for a little bit so that they can stop having that belief that every time they cry, you come to them, because that there leads to a lot of behavioral issues down the track. So if you know that they're not hungry, they've been to the toilet, it's nighttime, they're relaxed, they're not in pain, then crate training is something you just have to leave them in there for a little bit, and then once they fall asleep, if they wake up later on crying again, of course, take them to the toilet. But between that, during the day, just making sure you try and create it as much as possible, a very positive environment around the crate's really going to help in the long run. And then keep in mind that sometimes, and it's not that often that this happens, so don't go immediately thinking this is your dog, but sometimes some dogs really, really, really hate crates and hate being confined. And if that's the case, you could try something like a playpen, but that's sort of a last resort. Most of the time, the dogs who really, really hate crates have had a very negative experience being enclosed in a small area before, and now they're very scared of it, and you could do counter conditioning training for it. But yeah, this is, again, crate training, all these sort of, behavioral questions, it's very much a one-on-one case basis. You can't just have one set of rules or set of instructions or set of training that's going to help every dog. So if you're really having trouble, again, working with someone one-on-one is going to get the best results. But those are a few tips you can try for now and see how you go. And just remember, a puppy used to cry to get their mother's attention and their siblings' attention. So when they first come into your house, they're going to try and cry for that same reason. But it's your job as the new family to teach them how to appropriately ask for your attention without crying, because we don't want them to cry for our attention. We might want them to sit for our attention, and that's called manding, and that's a far better way to teach your puppy how to communicate than to just continue letting them cry and then answering those cries every time they do it.
Okay, good to know. Crying maybe for another reason. When a puppy's hungry, this person's asked, my puppy is always hungry. How do I know I'm feeding him enough?
My best tip, now you're going to need, I'm not going to, okay, so imagine if you're watching the video, it's going to be a lot easier, but if you're not watching the video, what I want you to do is I want you to close your fist, and then what I want you to do is I want you to run a finger over the back of your hand. Now, if you run your finger over the back of your hand and that's how your puppy's ribs feel, it means they're definitely getting enough food and they're leaning more towards getting to that overweight sort of area. Now, if you were to run your fingers over the front of your fingers, run your finger over the front of your fist where your fingers are bending, if that's how your ribs, the puppy's ribs feel, that means they're at a very good weight. However, if you run your fingers over your dog's ribs and it feels how it feels to run your own fingers over your knuckles, that means your puppy is underweight. So that's a really good guide to know if you're feeding your dog enough. If you're not sure, you can always swing past your vet. The nurses out the front can definitely tell you in about 10 seconds whether your dog is underweight, overweight, or at a good weight. And then the other good way is obviously you have to make sure you're giving them a good quality food. Those foods from the supermarkets, a lot of the time they're filled with a whole lot of fillers that aren't going to do anything good for your puppy other than make them put on weight and make them feel very hungry. So you need to have a very good quality food. So go to your vet, get a bag of food that they recommend. You can add some toppers to make it yummier because Cavoodles are very fussy, but just making sure the actual food you give them is very high quality. The way that you can imagine it is, you could take a child to McDonald's and give them, 20 nuggets, a burger, and, half an hour later they're hungry again. And it's because you're feeding them nothing but bad food and just, it does nothing for them. Whereas if you took your child and you gave them a very healthy dinner with, good quality meat, some vegetables, maybe some potatoes as well, they're going to be full for a lot longer. So make sure you're feeding a balanced diet. Otherwise, you're feeding them practically air. And yeah, they're going to be hungry. And hungry puppies cry, and hungry puppies chew, and hungry puppies cause a lot of behavioural issues.
Okay. Interesting to know. Mac, always in moderation, I guess.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. More, I guess, some tips and tricks now. Probably slightly back onto the breeding, but probably relative to anyone at home with a new puppy as well. How do you breed the puppies in your home and at the same time contain the smell, especially when they start eating and pooping on their own?
Well, I think you could answer this, Xander. How do we manage the smell here when we have puppies?
Spray a lot of diffuser or walk out of the house.
No, when we have very young puppies, we can't be spraying a diffuser. That's not good for their skin. But when you have an older puppy, if they do a smelly poo, of course, you can spray something nice. So the way that I keep it clean, Xander doesn't work from home, so I'm the one home all day with the smelly poos. You have to be on top of it. Now, hopefully you have a very good mother dog and she will clean up after the puppies. My dogs always clean up after them, and it saves me a lot of time, and that's the best way because the second they poo, the mother will eat it. Disgusting, but it's very normal. If your mother dog doesn't do that, it means you have to be on top of that. Every time you need to be, if they poo, you clean it up straight away. And the sooner you can get onto toilet training, the better. So my toilet training with my puppies starts at 3 weeks of age when they first start going to the toilet by themselves without their mum's aid, and they start going to the toilet on real grass. And the real grass absorbs the smell of the urine, and it also absorbs the smell of the poos. So that really, really helps. And then once the puppies, can regulate their body temperature, depending on how cold it is where you live, I also get the puppies outside ASAP. So probably I'd say at 4 weeks they go outside for the first time and they spend all day outside, and that really, really helps with the smell. And then otherwise, it's important to remember that puppies will smell, especially when they're learning to be toilet trained, and it just comes with breeding. And the best thing you can do is constantly air out your house, open the windows, put the aircon on if you can, and then, just wait until they, are fully toilet trained and they're going outside, and that makes it a lot easier.
Okay. Good to know. I guess another question which does relate to smell in a way. Any items for smell as well, I guess, but any items that you would recommend for birthing?
Towels. Lots and lots of towels. The towels are for drying the puppies off as soon as they're born and making sure they're breathing and stimulating that breathing. Lots of puppy pads because you're going to want the mum to give birth on the puppy pads, and every time one puppy comes out, you want to replace those puppy pads because you've obviously got the placentas and everything. And my goodness, is that smell? That's the worst smell by far for breeding. Something else really good is you need to have a temperature probe and some sort of heat, so a heat lamp, heat mat, to make sure you're putting the puppies into the right temperature environment. Otherwise they will die. If a puppy isn't at the right temperature and then tries to drink milk for the first time and they're too cold, it can actually kill the puppies. So you have to have a heat source and you have to have a temperature probe. Oh my God, you need a suction bulb, that's what they're called. So a suction bulb is what you use to suction out, to get all of the fluid out of their nose and out of their mouth. Without that, the puppy can drown in its own fluids from when it came out through the birthing process. So what's that? That's the towels to dry the puppies, puppy pads to have the mum give birth on, heat source, a suction bulb. You're probably going to need a pair of scissors to help cut the umbilical cord if the mum goes to cut it. Some, dental floss that has no flavour to tie off the cords. And then the final thing, most important thing in my opinion, well, almost most important, that would be a good reproduction specialist on the phone. So if something goes wrong, you can talk to them and you can rush them to the vet ASAP because things go wrong in birth and you need to make sure you have a good team behind you.
Okay, good. Good to know. All right. I guess on that, are there any tips that you would give? It's not a question that someone's asked, but on that, it can be quite overwhelming. If it's your first litter, and for someone who's not, an expert on birthing newborn puppies, are there any pieces of advice on how to sort of be best prepared, stay calm, for a successful delivery?
A mentor, if you've got a mentor, is always really handy to have. The reproduction specialists are fantastic. They're available 24/7 for any questions. The third thing you need to do as a breeder is you need to study. You need to do some learning. So there are some great certificates you can do out there to learn about how to successfully help your mum give birth. There's some certificates out there on how to raise the puppy in the first, couple of weeks of its life. You've also got programs like Puppy Culture that will step you through it. All of those things are really, really going to help you. And at the end of the day, something to keep in mind is giving birth is a very natural experience for the mums, and 99% of the time, if they are a maternal mum, they're going to have those maternal instincts, and they are able to successfully give birth without much intervention from you. So let the mum do their thing. There are certain time frames that, a puppy needs to be born after they start pushing and stuff, and those are good to know so you can keep track on it. But otherwise, take a step back and let the mum do its thing, and then if you are worried, you call the reproduction specialist.
Okay, there you go. All right, so puppy's been born. How do you test the temperament when picking up a puppy?
Well, this depends, because if you're going to pick up a puppy and you want to test the temperament of a puppy, you can't really do this in the time that it takes to go to a breeder and grab a puppy. It's really the breeder's job to temperament test a puppy. So what I would be doing is before you go to pick up your puppy, or before you go and pick your puppy, I would be asking the breeder if they can do some temperament testing. If your breeder has sorry about that, the girls are scratching their necks. If you hear that dinging in the background, the dogs are, sorry. If you go to your breeder and you ask them to do some temperament testing and they say no, I would probably look for a breeder who does do it, because a breeder who is doing temperament testing is also raising their dog on a curriculum program, and it means you're going to have the best chance possible at having a dog that has been socialized properly, desensitized properly, and is just well adjusted all around. And yeah, if a breeder isn't willing to do that, then the breeder isn't looking out for the puppies in their best interest, because each puppy has a different personality and each puppy is going to suit a certain style home best, and a breeder should be wanting to match their puppies up with a home that's going to suit them best, so that the puppy gets to have all of its needs met. Whether that's a dog that has a high human motivation and therefore is going to need a lot of time with their owners, playing, learning, training, or a dog that is more motivated to be by themselves and would rather a more quiet household and wouldn't suit a household with kids trying to play with them all day. Those sort of things are important to take into consideration. And it's, a breeder does the temperament testing, not the families. Because by then it's too late, because you can't really temperament test. It takes quite a long time to temperament test a litter. Okay.
So speaking on the other side, this person's asked the question, how do you effectively screen your puppy families, and what do you do if communication deteriorates over time?
Well, if communication stops over time, they're not the right family for your puppies, because for me personally, I'm in contact with every single family that has gotten a puppy from me, and I've been breeding now for this is going to be my 4th year breeding, and I'm still in contact. So if communication dies over time, that's completely fine. I don't want them to be the family of my puppies anyway. It means they're not invested in the puppies and learning about them. But to properly screen the families, I have, the wait list that they can join. They answer some questions, but then my favorite way to screen them is to get on the phone and talk to them. It's the best way to get to know someone, to hear about their family, their lifestyle. And if you get on the phone with someone and they don't have any questions for you and about your program, that's a bit of a red flag for me, because, getting a puppy is a very big decision. And if someone has no questions for the breeder, then they're the type of people who probably are going to go and buy off a pet shop, and they're not the families for me. So I want a family who has, 100 questions for me, because it means they're invested, they care how their puppy is raised, and it means they're going to put in the work after they get the puppy to make sure the puppy is trained properly, socialized properly, and then they're going to be there wanting my help in the future, and that's something I also really like to provide.
Yeah, it's definitely nice there for those families to have support in the aftercare after they've purchased their puppy from you. I guess, for other breeders out there who are looking at ways to value add to their business, grow and expand, what tips and tricks would you give them to help them grow that might be experience a bit of, I guess, problems, or I guess when they're unable to grow right now? How would how would you help them?
What I would say is to remember that people buy off people. We're in a day and age right now where the way that, I guess, buyers work is people don't buy off brands anymore, they buy off a person. So if you want to have a successful breeding business, you need to be the face of your breeding business. You can't hide behind the camera. You have to be in front of the camera talking about your program, talking about why your program is different and what you offer that other breeders are not offering. It's the only way to stand out online. And as soon as you put your face behind the camera, as soon as you put yourself out there, people start to trust you. And when people trust you, they'll then buy from you, and they'll trust you to do a good job of raising their puppy. So make sure you get on camera. It's scary at first, but like anything with any job, the first time you do it is scary. The more you do it, the better you'll be. And that's my best tip, is you have to have a point of difference, and then you have to get behind the camera and you have to start talking about that point of difference.
Okay. And I guess for your for your future, this person's asked, is there a possibility that in the future you might breed F1 Cavoodles as well as F1Bs?
Well, in case you don't know what that is, so an F1 Cavoodle is a first generation Cavoodle, and that's when you cross a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel with a toy or miniature poodle. That's the first generation. F1B generation is when you cross a Cavoodle with a poodle or a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. Then you have F2 generation, which would be Cavoodle to Cavoodle, and then you have a whole bunch of other ones down the track. But I myself breed F2 generation Cavoodles, so second generation, which means Cavoodle to Cavoodle, and it's first generation Cavoodle to first generation Cavoodle for F2. Confusing, I know. I also breed F1B, which means I have a Cavoodle mum and I breed her with a toy poodle. I myself will most likely never breed first generation Cavoodles, and the reason is I could not deal with a shedding dog in my house, and Cavalier King Charles Spaniels shed a lot. I have Cavoodles, my Cavoodles, they're pets. I love them more than anything. They're my own children. So I'm not going to have a dog in my family that doesn't suit my lifestyle. And for me, that's a low shedding dog. I also really do value the intelligence of a poodle, and that comes in with the Cavoodle. So the Cavoodle is my dream breed, and as part of my family, I want to have my dream breed, which is why I only have Cavoodles. In addition to this, there's a lot of talk out there online about how, first generation Cavoodles are the best. And if you start breeding, second generation, third generation F1Bs, that they're going to have health issues, behavioral issues, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of noise out there. My response to that is the type of puppy that you get is completely dependent on the temperament of the parents, and then completely dependent on how you raise them as the breeder. It has nothing to do with whether they are a first generation, second generation, third generation. And in terms of health, a breeder should be doing the proper health screening on their parent dogs before breeding. And if you do that proper health screening, and if you do it and there is no problem, then your puppies are going to be very, very healthy. It's when you have dogs, for example, a lot of Cavoodles can get eye infections, and they can be very prone to eye infections. Well, that actually is most likely because the parents have eye infections, and therefore you're breeding off of parents who don't have optimal genetics. So the health and the behavior has nothing to do with the generation. It has to do with the parents and how you raise them as a breeder. I won't be doing F1 first generation Cavoodles because I love Cavoodles, and those are the dogs I want in my family as my pets.
Okay, there you go. Cavoodles only. Next question. Have you heard of the 2-dose vaccination? Seems like it might be a new thing.
Well, depends. I don't know exactly. For puppies, they have 3 puppy vaccinations when they're young. And then for your adult Cavoodles, they have their vaccination, and then they can also get an injection up the nose for like kennel cough. If there's a 2-dose vaccination, my vets haven't mentioned that yet, and I've never heard of it. So I'm not quite sure what you're talking about there. Whenever it comes to vaccinations, your vet is going to be the most up-to-date on this sort of information, and I would be I would be trusting their judgment and their recommendations because they also know your dog. For me, my dogs have been getting the same vaccination their whole life, and I wouldn't call it a 2-dose vaccination. However, there is the injection in the neck, and then there is the injection up the nose. So possibly that's what you're talking about as a 2-dose. I'm not quite sure. Maybe talk to your vet about that one.
Okay, that's all right. Alrighty. I mean, on vaccines, someone has said that they've had a bad reaction, or their puppy had a bad reaction to their last puppy vaccine, C7, and then another year on, she had the C5 vaccination without any problems. Have you come across that before, where there's been certain components of one vaccine where puppies have had a negative reaction to?
It's very, very rare for that to happen. I haven't had that happen to me personally or any of my puppies, but if your puppy has had that reaction, very scary experience. Obviously, we don't want to be giving them that vaccination again unless, your vet, for some reason, believes that your puppy wouldn't react that way again. I know I read over that question briefly, and I know the person was asking whether I would recommend, vaccinating your dog again. For me, I am always very much pro vaccines for dogs. There are some, horrible illnesses out there like parvovirus that your dog can get, and those are life-threatening. So I am pro vaccines. But in your case, if your dog has had a bad reaction to the vaccine, I would speak to your vet, and if there is a vaccine possible that doesn't have the component that your dog reacted to and you can prove that, then I would vaccinate them with this other vaccine. Okay. It's very much you need to speak to your vet because they know the history, but I am pro-vaccine if you can get it.
Okay, there you go. Alrighty, coming up to, I guess, the last couple of questions here. Maybe a final tip or trick you could share, Tiana. Someone's asking any tips on good recall or teaching good recall skills. This person seems to be struggling at the moment with their dog.
Recall is one of those things that you will be training for the rest of your life. Recall is not one of those things that your dog is going to learn once and then know forever. It's one of those things that you always have to reinforce. So if you're using your recall and you're saying, for example, Nessie, come, which is my dog's name, and I don't give her a treat after that, well, I can guarantee the next time I say it, she's not going to do it. So recall always has to be followed with a treat, or if your dog is highly motivated by a ball or something, you could throw a ball for them. It always has to be rewarded. Otherwise, the recall becomes very, very ineffective, So if you're struggling with recall, I would go right back to basics. Firstly, let's pick a new recall word. So if you've been using the word come, let's pick something else to use, and let's reteach it and make sure it's very, very strong. For me, one of my favorite recalls to do with my dogs is I call it the treat game, and it's pretty much I say Nessie treat, and she comes to me and I give her a treat. And the reason why that is so effective is because I can't say treat without giving her a treat. So it reminds me and it makes sure that I always reward her with that. So pick a new recall word for your dog, and then start from the beginning and really, really, really enforce it. Only do it, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 times a day, and make sure it's very highly rewarded and don't overuse it. If you're using the recall and your dog isn't listening, well, there you go, it's ineffective again. So it always has to be rewarded, and you have to make sure it's always effective. Don't overuse it. And remember, your dog's name is not a recall. That's very important. So Nessie does not mean come here. It has to be Nessie come or Nessie treat for what I use.
There you go. Alrighty, last question. I'm moving across the world with my Cavoodle. Any tips to make sure they're safe? Probably apart from teaching them a new language, but potentially. Depends where you're moving. For me, if your dog is moving across the world, very likely they're going to be in a crate to go on the plane. I don't know of any international flights that allow you to have them in the cabin.
which is a shame. So I would be crate training before that to make sure they're as comfortable as possible in a crate. Then once you get overseas, I mean, the first thing I would be doing absolutely is making sure that the vaccination that you have, protects them against whatever viruses and illnesses are in the country you're now in. So making sure they're going to be up to date on their vaccines, and then making sure your parasite control is covering them. Don't assume that the fleas and the ticks and the worms that we get here are the same ones that would be a threat to your puppy in a new country. We have paralysis, bush ticks, and brown dog ticks here. The country you're going to might have different ones. So make sure that you're getting onto that parasite control, and making sure your puppy is covered for the new country is very, very important. And then making sure their vaccination is up to date. And then it's not so much keeping them safe, but it's more so much to help the transition. Your puppy is going to be very stressed and anxious when you first arrive, because they've just spent many, many hours on a plane in a crate in the cargo area, which can be quite frightening. So you need to give your dog some time to adjust. So make sure you're there for them. Don't just go to work the next day if you've got a new job. You need to be there for them to help them adjust to their new home and create some positive experiences for them in the new house and the new neighborhood. Those would be what I would be doing.
Lots of love.
Lots of love, always.
Cool. Well, that's all the questions, I think, Tiana. Anything else that you wanted to add, or?
No, I need some water is what I need. Okay. I've been talking so much. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted a question. I really enjoyed this. And thank you to Xander for asking me the questions. No
problem.
If you can hear, dogs sniffing and all that in the background, they have decided that it's also time for me to get off the camera, because they are getting a bit, restless. So thank you for, joining in and listening to this episode. I really enjoyed it. If you are new to the podcast, please make sure you follow the podcast so that you get notified when the new episode releases. I will be releasing new episodes every single Tuesday. And then if I have, some motivation in between that and I want to spontaneously upload another one, I will. But it's going to be every single Tuesday. The podcast is all about cavoodles, breeding cavoodles, raising cavoodles, training cavoodles, tips and tricks on cavoodles. So if you are a cavoodle parent or you're looking to get a cavoodle for your family, this is the podcast for you. And I can't wait to see you back here next week. Make sure you follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Oodleway or at Tiana Karamais if you'd rather Google that. And then, you can see my face and we can meet face to face. Well, kind of face to face, not quite. But anyway, I'll see you next week. Thank you so much again. And thank you, Xander.
No worries. See you later.
Bye.